What's going on, guys? It's Jordan DeYong here, and today I want to talk to you about the different stages of a property portfolio. Building a portfolio is different for every individual. People might start at 18 and slowly build a portfolio over time. Others might be 30 on a huge salary and buy 4 in 1 year. No matter how you build your portfolio, it generally goes through 4 main stages. These stages consist of acquisition, consolidation, debt stabilization, and then exit strategy. I've tried to keep these stages as broad as possible because everyone's situation is different. But contrary to what you may think, we should always start with our exit strategy. The exit strategy stage aligns heavily with our goals, which through interviewing other investors on my podcast, Smashed Avo Property, I've realized that can vary drastically between different property investors. Obviously, the main commonality between them is financial freedom and wealth creation, but this can also come through various different formats. One may be through excess cash flow, paying off the properties as well as paying for all of your living expenses. Another may be through accumulating compound capital growth over time, then selling off the properties one at a time when you need to in retirement. Others don't like the idea of selling off property and paying capital gains tax, so instead they opt to pull out the equity from the capital growth and use that to pay for their living expenses, which is essentially paying interest on interest and can be very risky. Another strategy people like to implement is to leave a legacy for the future generations, handing over the properties to their kids. These are just the common strategies, and as you can see, there are multiple ways to go about it. And that's why when building your portfolio, it's essential to understand what your goals are and exit strategies will be. Also, if you're loving this content, make sure you smash that like button as it seriously helps out with the YouTube algorithm. Of course, these goals do change over time, especially when life circumstances change, such as having kids. It might steer a hungry cash flow investor into a capital growth investor who wants to leave a legacy behind for their children. So before you beeline down one path, it's always better to consider everything that might change in the future. To kick us off is the acquisition stage, and this is all about acquiring property over time. As I said at the start of this video, depending on your current position, this could mean 1 property every 3 years or 4 in 1 year. But essentially, it all comes down to your income. So we could say that a prerequisite to the first stage is increasing your income as much as possible. Of course, income isn't everything, it just significantly helps out with how much you can borrow. The more you can borrow, the more different types of assets you can potentially consider. And moving forward, asset selection is going to be essential to building out a property portfolio. So the more assets you have access to, the better your selections can be. Asset selection is essential because if we get the first one wrong, it could take a considerable amount of time to see any growth, or even see negative growth for that matter. And the longer it takes to see growth, the longer it takes before we can use that equity to leverage into a second or third investment property, which slows the whole acquisition process down. 95% of investors get stuck on only 1 or 2 investment properties. Firstly, because of their income, of which they are completely capped out their maximum borrow capacity for holding on their current properties. And the second is because they may have purchased B or C grade properties, or even worse, investment stock property. If you want to learn more about how to find an A grade investment property, you can watch this series up here. And if you're interested in finding out what investment stock actually means, I'm planning to talk about it more in an up and coming video. So make sure that you subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss it. Most investors who initially set out in the acquisition stage will say something like, I want to buy 10 properties in 10 years. And although this is a great aspiration, it doesn't really mean much. Are they going to be 10 $100,000 properties, 10 properties in diverse locations, or 10 properties on one title block? And this is why it's essential to line your exit strategy with your goals, such as earning $120,000 a year from passive income off the rental from your investment properties, so you can comfortably retire, and actually work backwards from there to implement a property portfolio plan and put into place some scenarios that will indicate what, when, and where you should buy your next property. This way you can account for big life events such as a wedding or kids without being too concerned about how your portfolio is tracking. The switchover between acquisition and consolidation doesn't happen on your final property purchase. It's more of a stage where we become less aggressive with our property purchases and instead look back at the performance of our existing properties and analyze if they're performed as we expected them to. As discussed, for the investors who didn't start with a plan to begin with, they could have changed their strategy mid-acquisition stage, and now they've got a mixed bag in their portfolio. Some assets could be holding their portfolio back, and it's worth considering if they're viable to hold onto. Although I'm not a massive fan of ever selling property, if we own a lemon, it's gotta go. After we've decided what's worth holding onto, we can roll into that debt stabilization stage. And some like to call this stage debt reduction, but I've gone with debt stabilization as it's not everyone's goal to reduce their debts. Some like just to continue buying cash flow positive properties, and others even like to increase their debts and live off the equity. Of course, I have my own opinion about these various strategies, but everyone has their own goals, so I'll let it be for this video. Essentially here, we're either paying down our debts as fast as possible, lowering our interest repayments, meaning we're keeping more of that rental income, giving us this snowball effect while reducing our debts. For others, this may mean stabilizing their portfolio's LVR, so that they can continue to buy cash flow positive properties at the right time in the cycles, without too much hassle about getting more finance. Or for the investors wishing to live off their equity, they might be waiting for the peaks of the property cycles to refinance and have that equity sitting there so they can live off when it's needed. All in all, for this stage, majority of the heavy acquisition is over. We are happy with where our current portfolio sits, and they're essentially letting time do its thing. This is where we see compound growth really appreciate in our portfolios, as we've had decades of growth already up until this point. For most, this stage eases into that last stage of exit strategy, either reducing our debt until the properties are fully paid off, or living off the excess rental income. To fast track this process, we can also achieve either of these by selling off some of the properties and using the profit to pay off the debt, which is also another commonly used strategy. Going back to the typical 10 properties in 10 years goal, this could result in something like holding on to 10 properties until they have doubled in value, selling off 5 to 7 of them, paying out all of the debt completely, and living off the rental income from the remaining properties in retirement. And this is a much better aspiration than just saying, I want 10 properties by 30 or 40. Now, you may have noticed that I haven't been putting a time frame around these stages, as these strategies vary drastically depending on when you start, what your exit strategy is, and how big you want your portfolio to be before you execute out that exit strategy. Again, it's also very dependent on what stage of life you're kicking off your portfolio. Someone starting in their 20s has much more time on their hands, giving them greater resilience to making potential mistakes, where someone starting in their 50s might go for a strong cash flow positive approach, which will help supplement some of their income while transitioning into their retirement. That being said, there's no wrong or right time to get into property. It's never too early or too late. You can't predict the cycles, and as long as you can afford to get in, have access to borrow that money, choose A-grade investment properties, and can afford to hold on to them for the foreseeable future. So building your portfolio all comes down to your why. Why do you want to invest in property? And you're probably saying, well, financial independence or wealth creation right now, which is perfect, but how does that actually look for you? How much passive income do you need to live off per year? And how much equity do you need to last you through retirement? Once you answer these questions, you can understand your exit strategy and work backwards from there. If you plan to execute your exit strategy at, say, 65, how many years of debt stabilization will you need? 5, 10, 20. If we allow for 20 years, which is plenty of time for compound growth to take place, then we need to have fully consolidated our portfolio by 45. If we allow 5 years for consolidation, giving you plenty of time to analyze what is worth keeping in your portfolio, and allowing you enough time in the market to pick a good time to sell them and then potentially buy some new ones, then acquisition should be finished around 40. Continuing on with our example of 10 properties, selling off 7 of them and then living off the passive income from the remaining 3. This means we need to acquire 10 properties before 40. So if you're, say, 20 years old now, the plan should be to buy at least 1 property every 2 years until you're 40. This doesn't have to be exact. You could buy 4 properties in the first 10 years and then use the equity from them to buy 6 in the next 10 years. But by starting at 20, you have so much time on your side, and it allows you some flexibility to travel and have kids. If you're watching this in your 30s and freaking out right now because you think it's too late, it's never too late. You can easily push out that exit strategy to age 75, adding another 10 years so that you can start fresh from today. If you're a paid employee, your super should cover you over these 10 years anyway. Or you could save a significant cash buffer on the side to ride you through. I want to know what your exit strategy may be, or what current stage your portfolio is in. Leave it down in the comment section below. As always, seek your own professional financial, legal, taxation, and property investing advice for your current situation. These videos are just my opinion and are general in nature and should never be considered as personal advice. If you're keen for more content, make sure you subscribe and smash that notification bell so you don't miss a video. And until next time, happy house hunting.